Love me tender, love me blue, baby, I love you. And for all the listeners, I love all of you.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for opening up the show.
Yeah, my pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a little while. Things have changed.
I think the first question I asked you the other day is when did I last meet you?
Yeah, it would have been, I'm going to say about 5 or 6 years ago on the job site. We were talking about self-leveling is what we were talking about.
Yeah, so that was a business I started while I was at HCM.
Yep.
And it was HC Products, and I was fascinated with, the self-level industry initially, rehab, and, we'll touch on that. I thought, if you would let me talk about lessons for people might listen in and,
yep, for sure.
And major jobs I've done since 1982.
You've been in the game for a while.
Yeah, it's 42 years this year.
So I got to do a quick shout out to Kalau. I guess it's Kalau. So Chris Draper from Kalau Builders, thanks so much for the tee. I'm wearing his tee today. I really appreciate you sending me that. And the note, thanks for all that you do. But for the trades, Manny, thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate that. Are you looking for a sustainable and durable real wood solution to elevate your next project? Let me introduce you to the gold standard. Thermery, the world's largest and most trusted manufacturer of thermally modified wood and sauna materials. Their wood is like the superhero version of regular wood, stronger, more stable, and ready to take on whatever Mother Nature throws its way. With a wide range of thermally modified wood products from decking and cladding to sauna and statement walls, when you choose Thermery, you're not just investing in quality, you're investing in the health of our planet too. Join countless architects, designers, builders, and homeowners who have trusted Thermery to bring their vision to life. The best way to fully experience the Thermery difference is to hold the real thing in your hands, so visit their website today at www.thermeryusa.com and also find them on IG at ThermeryUSA. This podcast is brought to you by Redmond Distributing, a proud family-owned and operated HVAC supplier, serving Ontario for the past 22 years. With warehouses conveniently located in both Mississauga and Ottawa, they specialize in providing premium HVAC and hearth equipment across the region. Redmond Distributing is committed to supporting HVAC businesses with their dedicated customer service, reliable warranties, free training sessions in their operational facility, inventory management, and free delivery to most locations in Southern Ontario. For a partnership with true HVAC equipment specialists, choose Redmond Distributing. Explore more at www.redmonddistributing.com. Introducing the new Air-Cooled 26 RCA, the quietest, most powerful, and most durable generator with 109 amps max power on liquid propane. Equipped with the first-to-market low-oil shutoff switch, it's the quietest 26 kilowatt on the market with a 56 dB at exercise. The 89% larger ceramic fiberglass insulated muffler and acoustic foam insulated inlet duct deliver the best sound quality on the market at exercise. Its larger muffler reduces back pressure by 62%, eliminating restrictions in exhaust to optimize pressures for peak performance. Its CH1006 engine with 20% higher compression ratio and variable ignition timing optimized by fuel delivers the most power in its class. It's also equipped with advanced engine tuning with an air cleaner assembly relocated directly over the carburetor, which optimizes airflow to deliver enhanced performance. When it comes to reliability, nothing beats a Kohler home generator. Get the facts and find your generator at Effect Electric Limited on IG. Choose Dahl for your plumbing needs and discover the peace of mind that comes with their unwavering reliability and exceptional service. Experience the Dahl difference and join the growing community of contractors who trust in their expertise and rely on their products. Check out Dahl at www.dahlvalve.com and on social at dahlvalve. Hey architects and builders, do you want to stand out from the competition? Fraser Wood Siding has your back. Fraser Wood Siding is a leader in pre-finished wood siding. They manufacture beautiful pre-finished wood siding using only the highest quality PEFC certified Canadian softwood. Fraser Wood Siding is available in 17 profiles and unlimited colors. Fraser Wood Siding is available in 17 profiles and unlimited colors, supplied by the global leader in paints, Sherwin-Williams. Whether your design taste is classic, contemporary, conservative, or bold, they've got you covered. They'll gladly match the color of any paint manufacturer and send a sample on an actual piece of Fraser Wood Siding in just a few days. Visit their website at www.fraserwoodsiding.com and reach out about your upcoming projects to benefit from their industry-leading lead times. Fraser Wood Siding, get inspired. And I want to let everybody know that I got Martin Halliwell here. PENG MBA footprintengineering.ca is where to find him. You can reach him at Martin H at footprintengineering.ca. And then also his phone number to reach him is 519-240-6334. And then we're going to talk about engineering. We're going to talk about construction. We're going to talk about patents. We're going to talk about everything that goes on in all over that world kind of thing, right?
Yes, I look forward to trying to give you a few lessons and maybe the listeners a few lessons
100%.
about design build.
Yeah.
Famous.
How'd you get into the game, Martin?
Well, June 1st, 1982. I was hired from Western, and I showed up at Deep Foundation's offices in Thornhill and wore a tie. I often say the story was, I showed up like any grad would. And then that was the last day I wore a tie for 20 years. So, I'm a true field experience construction guy. I did some really interesting jobs right away with Deep Foundations. They were very innovative. To give credit to some of the great engineers and the practical people that walked beside them. Dave Miller was a famous individual in Toronto. Bill Lardner, famous engineer. And
were you getting on projects in the Toronto core, or was it just outside of the Toronto area in the beginning?
There's in the 80s, I was in the right place at the right time with those gentlemen. There was a particularly strong works manager named Norm Como, another guy I'd have to say was influential in my career. Practical guy, ex-operator, trades guy, and he quit 3 years in. So they gave me the job.
Okay.
So in the 80s, I did 800 design builds in Toronto.
800 of them?
800, yeah. I've done 4,000.
Just in that decade alone, or was
Just in that decade alone, yeah. Because we grew that company right away. We had a great group of guys. We had 100 guys, and they were some great characters. Bob Ambler, Peter Sullivan, they're all retired today, operators. We built machines. We custom built tieback machines, Rig 50, Rig 51. Norm started me on that project, and I don't know where I got it. I think my dad was surprised that I ended up with that work ethic. But Norm would kick you in the butt. Like he'd say, I did a job in Ottawa, a famous job, Ottawa Courthouse. And I ran the inline concrete pump on a sloping rock caisson job. And Norm says, well, you're going to run the pump. And I'm like, but you had to keep it clean. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing like learning how to keep a concrete pump clean. Because if that thing the next day screws up a 10-man crew.
And back in those days, those machines were not all that forgiving. Like, they were difficult, right?
Well, an inline concrete pump is, we started with a Mako and it didn't really work. And then that was more of a grout pump.
Okay.
But then, we worked with Pumpcrete. And there were some great suppliers along the way. Herb McGeera. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's still around. But, these are all people that I'd like to thank for having the patience with a young engineer. Western used to introduce a young engineer to Deep Foundations every year. And there was a kind of a famous guy. I worked with him in Calgary because they had an office in Calgary, Alan McNabb. And he was a character. So, he went out to Calgary and ran Deep Foundations in Calgary. And I did an interesting project there in 83. I did a Bow River working bridge over the Bow River. I returned to the Bow River in 2007. I did the famous Bow job, Perch Wall. But so some of the things, like in 86, I ran the joint venture between Anchor Shoring and Deep Foundations at the Sky Dome. So I did all the special foundation work. It was on rock, but there's still rock anchors. And Ellis Don, John Bush, I remember John Bush. He was a great guy. And I remember coming into the trailer once, and I had a young-looking face, and he thought I was the guy picking up the concrete cylinders. And I said, no, I'm running this joint venture for Deep and Anchor.
Yeah.
At the end, he knew that I could keep my crews organized and always make schedule. So I know how to organize men, and I know how to save costs and schedule now. So really, I have a value proposition. I do value engineering. And I had those patents we'll talk about maybe later.
Yeah, eventually I want to get into them as well too. So it's like, it sounded like you just were thrown into the mix and you kind of just, okay, there's a problem, let's solve it. Was it like that back then?
Yeah, you know, I learned that, I learned a very valuable lesson. I learned that the tradesman will be on your side if you don't have any ego and if you're willing to work with them physically. And then I would use the more experienced guys. There was guys like Enrico, Emilio, great Italian and Portuguese men who worked as laborers, and then, like I mentioned, some of those operators. And when you go home at night, one of the tricks I learned was, to tell them what was in my mind about my problem and what I would probably do, to stay awake at night, try and solve a problem. And they'd come in the next morning and they would solve it, right? They'd say, hey, you told me about that. And then I would listen to them. So I learned very early that if you don't ask your tradesmen and don't give them the challenges, right, then you're running on ego, right?
What do you think, Martin, today? Like, do you think that the younger generation of tradespeople, they want that? They want that guidance to try to collaborate? Is that what it is? Or because I see it yesterday, but I don't see if it's the same today.
No, I think I give credit to the tradesmen. I mean, you got to develop it, right? You've got to ask them an opinion.
Yeah.
Like, most of them would say that engineers are the brain damaged ones, right? And I got to say, I've met some, but I've met some great engineers too.
Yeah.
So I think to make construction, and particularly design build work, you need both.
Yep.
You need mentors like Bill Lardner, and you need great engineers. Again, Western would feed people, and I started tapping into that. Western had a geotechnical group, Kerry Rowe, Quigley, and they were very KY Low famous people, and so right to the end, I used Western. Like, I hired Jason Weck from Western. And Jason Weck was a gold medalist in his bachelor's, which is really hard to get. A gold medalist is top marks, right? And if you get that at Western Civil Engineering with 200 people, that's a good guy to get. And Jason, I can't say enough about him. I mean, he was, in the summers, he did house framing. So he was practical. He was a great guy to have a beer with, and amazing engineer. So he's the president of HC MacCon now.
Okay.
And I'm very proud that I hired him, but I'm also proud of some of the tradesmen that I was able to acquire, because HC MacCon and HCM is by far the best company in Canada. And in Calgary, for instance, I hired Craig Rowe. Craig Rowe was from North American, and I was doing the bowl job in 2007, and I asked people in town, well, who's the best engineer? Well, you should talk to Craig Rowe. Mm-hmm. And so he came over and met me on a Saturday, because I usually work Saturdays. And we got along. And the nice thing about Craig is he, too, was interesting. He was a millwright first. And then he went back for civil engineering.
So these guys are getting their hands dirty.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jason, for sure, and Craig, those are just two people. Like, if you can get an engineer, and then what I would do is I'd interview them and say, okay, what'd you do for the summers?
Yeah.
Now, some of them would be in an engineer's office, and you know what you get with that.
Yeah.
But if somebody said, well, I was out in the field doing this, or I did this before I became an engineer, then you could get a real bonus guy. Some of the tradesmen I've hired, like equipment was a big thing in that industry. Like, I know all the equipment guys, and I bought the equipment because I was fortunate to be an owner in the last 20 years, but then also at Deep Foundations. They let me go to the ADSC shows and to buy equipment. And we saw equipment really change. In Toronto, it's amazing. The Europeans came in, and you end up with really sophisticated Bauer, Soilmex. There was a huge transition in Toronto.
Why did it take so long to get to Toronto? Because obviously Europe and other parts of the world were already advancing and doing all kinds of stuff. And then it almost felt like Toronto was like a last stop. Yeah,
there's some truth to that. Not in my backyard syndrome a little bit. Until somebody buys the first rig, it becomes a case where today, for instance, I think there was some things, like Toronto has changed, and it hasn't necessarily changed for the better. Because I'm an earth honoring systems guy, and I believe that, pouring more concrete and steel seems to be the owner. It's not getting a benefit there. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at steel, rebar, it's 7,500 kilograms of CO2 per 1,000 kilograms of cement or of rebar.
Okay.
And cement's 1-to-1, so 1,000. So if you get those equations right, the issue we have in Toronto today is they've regulated this bathtub thing, where you know when you do a condo in Toronto. Keep in mind, I drilled 800 jobs in Toronto or in Ontario in Canada in the 80s. The soil's dry. It's pre-consolidated soil. It's clay. You know, there used to be a mile of ice on Toronto. Well, they got concerned about, it's my little pea in the pond, and I'm going to say this. So
but did they get concerned of that because we were actually pushing a little bit out to the lake? Is that
not really? You know, I did a job at Deep that was a famous job. It was called the Radisson Hotel on Queens Quay. And we did a dry 3-story parking garage there. So when the technique is right, you can do it. But they don't do it anymore. I mean, to some extent, that was a one-off that Norm Como and I sort of designed. We drilled over top of the wall, solid 20 MPa caisson wall. I think it's called the Radisson now. Might have been the Admiral Hotel first.
What's going on today? Because obviously that little strip of Toronto, it's just growing because they're throwing condo after condo after condo, and they're just getting right on the edge of the water here now, right?
Yeah, so typically if they go down there, they might be putting in a full secant wall, which is interlocking caisson wall, and maybe they would increase the strength from 5 to 10 to 15 MPa, or, you know, there's different techniques. The downtown, though, like if you go to Queen and Yonge, the soil's dry. Like it's clay and rock, and we wouldn't have any water at the end of those jobs. But the Toronto said, okay, Ashbridges Bay keeps getting expanded. Well, they blame all the condos, right? So what they said is, well, we're going to make everyone tank their basements.
Now, Mart, was it blaming all the condos or blaming slightly inferior building techniques of some condos?
Well, I think you're over the target.
Yeah.
So in other words, you know what they do in Toronto? It's almost laughable. They put 5 feet of concrete in the bottom of every excavation, like a big pad, and because Toronto said you got to tank the basement, and you can't put any combined storm and sanitary in back to the treatment plant. But you know what they did with that is they backed it up into the street where the city's old and all the storm and sanitary connects.
From the 1800s.
They made it worse at Ashbridges. And so I actually have a patent I'll talk about later that takes the water and lets it evaporate behind a double shotcrete wall. I call it FEH2O lock. And it would save a developer on 2 acres $7 million. So it's also schedule, right?
Yeah.
So I went after this stuff since I've been out of HCM. And I know all the top engineers. Matter of fact, I meet another great engineer was Brian Isherwood. But the guy who took over Isherwood Associates is Nader Ansari. Generally, he says, you know, the rate of evaporation of Toronto soils exceeds the rate of leakage. Very eloquently said. So therefore, things we did.
The concrete.
Yeah. And so when you do 5 feet of concrete, because of the building code, another pet peeve of mine, the building code says you got to put 265 kilograms of rebar per cubic meter of concrete. So you have this density that's carried over to our P3 subways. When they do a subway wall in Toronto, it's 1.2 meters thick. In 1970s, Bill Lerner and Dave Miller did the Yonge and Finch. It's still there. The tiles are still on it, 16 inches thick. But what you have is...
So they went from 16 inches to 1.3 meters, which is basically...
And a 1.5 meter...
60, it's 5 feet.
Yeah, 1.5 meter... 1.5 is 5 feet. 1.5 meter base slabs would be not uncommon. So I'll talk later about geoform, and they get very involved in KN Zergalu. He's a really interesting CEO. So he gets very involved in geopolymer injections, which are the way to fix leaks, because when you pour a 1.2 meter wall with that kind of rebar in it, you're going to get honeycomb and all kinds of problems with the wall.
Because you can't get, the concrete can't move. can't.
Yeah, I mean, you can spend a lot of money on plasticizers, but it's still a problem with how you place it. So they've gone to shotcreting. I'm a bit of a shotcrete expert. I brought shotcreting to Toronto in one
In
of
the
my
80s?
It was actually so Deep Foundations ended in '89.
Okay.
And I left because I wanted to do general contracting. So I went to work for Matthews Contracting, Matthews Group, very dynamic in Mississauga. And they were doing shotcrete in Mississauga clay over rock. And it caught my eye. I wasn't terribly involved in that, although I did, by the end of that 4 years, become the president of that company. And it was more a case of, I was left and, they had to make some reorganization. A lot of developers in the 90s got in trouble. They got in trouble with development and too much debt. So, Elliston was in trouble then. And all these companies.
But Elliston,
they're not in trouble now, yeah.
They made $900 million last year or something like that?
Well, maybe 900 million sales.
Yeah, in sales.
Yeah, so there's a big difference between sales. They do
of course. That's why you have such amazing accountants.
They do construction management. So they don't really.
Yeah, they leave all the responsibility to subs.
Yeah, so on P3 jobs, that's build, own, operate. That's the way the government model's gone. Now, what happens with that, and what's the big trend is in the industry, is the engineering companies have consolidated. So all these engineers end up saying, okay, we're getting the end of our line, get our money out. So the Europeans came in and bought them. So these huge engineering companies from Europe came into Toronto, and then they charge on a P3 job 8% of hard cost. So why would they reduce the rebar or the concrete? And they actually say that they design those buildings for nuclear. Now, if there's going to be a nuclear, I don't think I'm going in the bottom of a subway box, right? Really.
Is that legitimate? They actually designed it in the anticipation of a nuclear bomb being tacked on Toronto?
I think when you only have two bidders on a P3 job, right? The engineers are going to talk.
I'd love to get back to the fact that you were saying that back in the day, subways were being made with 16-inch concrete, and now today it's 1.3, 1.4, whatever it was. You're talking about 16 inches versus 60 inches, which is 5 feet. Why?
And the code got changed.
Yeah,
and the rebar got denser.
What is the reasoning behind that?
Well, at Yonge and Finch, all the soil in Toronto will drain.
Okay.
But some of them are pockets. Like you can go to York Mills, you can go to Bloor Street, you get down 100 feet, you're going to have wet holes. But there was technique we got through then. And raft slabs are a tremendous cost for these owners. It takes...
Huge steel, huge concrete.
It takes weeks to tie that.
Yeah.
And then you're pouring that in a big, that's impressive. You got every concrete pump in the city reaching over the fence.
On the weekend, PDOs all the time, you're owning the streets and you're just doing it in the middle of the night, and everybody that's going partying or whatever is fed up that there's this closure going on because there's a new tower going on.
It's always road traffic, right?
Yeah,
always
Toronto.
Road detours.
Do you know any information about the Eglinton LRT, the crosstown?
Yep.
And
I do.
And so how did they go that whole same routes and stuff like that? Because I heard a rumor that someone was telling me that it hasn't opened up yet because of the unstable soil conditions.
Well, they're claiming, right?
That's what they're claiming. That's the rumor.
No, but that's how they get. That's why Kane's business is so good in geoform. In other words, there's definitely situations where if you have boreholes on a job like that, and if that borehole is dry, but over here the borehole shows some water, then they're saying, well, it was dry there, so we assumed it was dry everywhere. Now, on that job, I know Canadian, and I know Steve Fogarossi from Canadian, and he's passed now, but he worked with me at Matthews. He was my chief estimator at Matthews. So Canadian hired him, and he did a real good job with them. Now, when he bid Crosslinks, he was $6 billion, and Elliston was $5 billion.
And what are we at now?
Well, I would think, who knows? Because I think they're basically, they have to, let's face it, that was the first one. Everybody was learning. And
what do you mean by it was the first one?
Eglinton Crosstown.
Yeah, but building a subway system is not really new technology. There's new toys and new machinery to do it. But that's kind of why I respected. Let's go back to '89, when they were building the Sky Dome at the time.
It's dry. It's dry, by the way.
Yeah, but the thing was, I remember because I was part of drafting class in my high school days when I was at that time, and there was all the submissions on how this structure was going to be built, the stadium was going to be built, and I didn't know anything about this at the time. It just made sense to me that they were going to use old technology to make that roof move. They didn't want to take the chance of trying to use new technology in the fear of maybe that roof will have some problems down the line So all they literally did was just steel casters that were rolling on a rail, and that's how you move that roof. And it's worked all the time. There's not been major issues with that specific. I mean, the concrete's been repaired over time and stuff like that, but that structure stadium, it's been around since the late 80s.
86.
86,
was when it was built, and so it took...
It took until 89, I think, was the official opening. So, I mean, we're talking a long, long time here that structure is actually still good and stable and strong, and it was built a certain way. So it's like when you get to crosstown...
And it was built on rock.
Oh, so the Skydome was?
It was dry.
It was bone dry.
But
that's all landfill as far as I remember, right?
Well, yes. I mean, in the turn of the century, they used to take the garbage, go to the end of the piers and dump it off the edge.
Yeah.
So what's that do? That's just... eventually, it's easy to dredge out. But the rock elevation is important to know. So at Yonge Street, it's 30 feet. Front Street is 30 feet. Now, if you do a job there today, the rock is still the same. And if it's one block north of Front Street, you got 5 feet of concrete pad there, even though it's dry. The water table hasn't changed. But if you back it up, you'll have some perched water that'll build up. So, for instance, in Toronto, you got a old city, 15 to 20, really 15 feet, maybe 20 feet is fills. So that will sit on the clay, and the water will sit there. So people think, well, that's a real water table, but it's not. If you let that drain, like if you were to cut a berm and let it drain, you'd have no water.
And it eventually does drain.
The rate of evaporation exceeds the rate of leakage. That's natter and sorry. So I like quoting him, but by the same token, he's slow to do my patent because he has to go through all the work and the risk. He sees it as a risk of, so I replace the waterproofing.
But so why can't we embrace that tech? That's a T-shirt in itself, the rate of evaporation. Yeah, well, that just makes sense, right?
The rate of, but that might be poking engineers that believe they're doing the right thing. Like, I believe everyone's well-intentioned. But, when you've been around that long, and when you did the jobs with Brian Isherwood and Bill Lardner, both of them passed. Bill Lardner lived to 93. And when he was 91, 92, we used to meet at Isherwood's. And he created a group called the Design Optimization Working Group because he was so aghast at what was happening. But he was still sharp. So you got an old guy like that with influence, but eventually the old guy dies. So then who remembers it? Well, I remember.
But who's he passing it down to?
Well, he sold deep, well before that. Like Dave Miller died first. He was the practical guy. And then Lardner sold it. And eventually what happened was Anchor Shoring sold to this new GFL.
Oh, okay.
And then Deep sold.
Okay.
So Anchor was really well run. They were very good at change orders. Don Tattle, famous, sharp engineer. Her two uncles, her father and her uncle started it.
Okay.
So they would have all started in the early 70s. And Dawn did a very good job. I think she got twice what Deep got because she had a particularly strong way of getting change orders. But nonetheless, this is a rumor anyway. I knew all these people, and they're all retired. I keep working because frankly I have to. I had a really bad divorce, and I kind of poked the bear too much at HCM. The bear being my partner.
Yeah.
And so, but Jason Weck, some of the people at HCM, I'll shout out, like Dave Burke, for instance, fantastic mechanic. I got him to be the equipment manager. Like, hey, you're a mechanic, how, and he's the best in the business. So he and Jason Weck, right? You got the two things covered. The same way Miller used to watch what the equipment was bought, and Lardner used to watch the engineering. We got probably the best detailed design engineer in special foundations anywhere that I hired, Jason Weck, and you got Dave Burke. So, and both of them are good people, good They're really good
Here's
people.
the question, Martin. Why is it that Toronto seems like it just over-engineers everything to death? And where are all the failures to cause that?
Well, there isn't any.
That's what I mean.
Well, you don't really want a failure to prove your design. But by the same token...
But previous failures, we don't have enough of a historical failing rate for us to dictate that it should be built this way. So why are we going to this stream?
I've never... I've never had a failure that I felt personally responsible for, and I was setting the jobs up. So then at HCM, we were teamwork, innovation, service, and sustainability. So the innovation and foundations came out of that thing, and we were very innovative, mainly because I always tried to compete based on a better design. If they gave you design freedom, then how are you going to use it? You can hire Isherwood, but I found that Isherwood got very busy when things got busy the last 15 years. So I started RWH engineering. So Rowack Halliwell. So the guy in Calgary was, and then Wack was the engineer, so then Halliwell. And that today is a major advantage. Now, after doing that, Nader will say to me, you're going to change the industry again. And I'm not really in a position of influence to do that. So I just take little bites of innovation like geoforming I want to learn. So what happens is all the other companies, they started taking apart Isherwood, and there was 8 senior engineers that got taken out. So every other company followed what we did. So because you got to do it. Mm-hmm. You can't compete with HCM unless they have an RWH. And, we were a little better organized. Like another guy I'd shout out, it would be Rob Mera. So Rob Mera, I believe, is running RWH now. And they've got everybody into partnerships. And you got to share the wealth, right? So if you're not afraid as the owner to cut these people in, and you get retention, right? And I was always about that, right?
What's the fear, Martin? What's the competitive?
Usually it's control and money. People generally, if it's more money, then you start, your workers start to be, it's like the tradesmen. Like, why shouldn't the tradesman be a partner? And some are.
If you look, just corporate greed.
Well, Tom Stack, for instance, his father was Gord Stack.
Okay.
So Tom Stack and I did the Skydome together, and Gord was famous, 70s guy, and he partnered with the Tattle brothers, who were engineers. So Anchor was our main competition in the 80s. So the things I'm talking about will not be contested by people who drilled in Toronto before. Mm-hmm. And, there was a guy, Michael DeAndrea. I went to a Western reunion, and he ran the city. He ran the engineering construction for the city. So here I am on a short list, invited because of my, I guess in some ways, my name and availability that night. And Michael DeAndrea was there. And here's a guy who's on top of the whole city. And I said, do you realize what they're doing? So I had a chance to tell him. Well, and he made sure that he said, listen, I'll be in touch. Well, he didn't get around to calling me till his last week in office. So he called me, right? And he said, I had a little bit of communication with him. And he turned it over to somebody else, and then the bureaucracy continued, right? So the person that got the message that night, which is you don't need 5 feet of concrete in the bottom of every excavation, right? Like, we're killing our condo owners.
Yeah.
All these condo jobs, they're stalled, or somebody's paying the price of that square foot.
Of course, the money's got to come from somewhere.
Well, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And the subways, that's really tough. So I go back to the fact that...
What subways? Are we...
the P3s.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so you've got the whole program is basically build, own, operate with 2 bidders. So I'm fairly sure those 2 bidders and their structural engineers don't have any interest in reducing the cost. Why would you? There's only 2 bidders.
Money's coming in. That's
There's only 2 bidders.
Either you get it or I get it. I'll get this one, you get the next one.
Well, I don't know if they'll do that. I can't say that people... I never fix bids. But so I got to believe that some of that stuff's legit. But when you have scale, you look at Green Infrastructure Partners. They own Deep and Anchor. And they got... I don't know how many BG40s and BG45s. And, they take the casing, they bolt it together. They use power to twist it in. and they lose sight of the soil they got there. In some cases, they're doing that in ground that drills open. So why put the horsepower and the diesel fuel into it? Mm. And I held off a lot on those types of investments, mainly because I didn't have that kind of money in HCM. But we had Watsons. We made a lot with open holes. If you drill up in Brampton, it's open hole. But that whole thing with Toronto, what happens is, I'm glad we have a chance to talk about this.
Yeah,
because
I'm fascinated by this.
So what happens is Canada follows Toronto. So everybody goes to these common municipal things, and they say, gee whiz, we got all these condos, and Toronto brags, well, here's what we did to control ash bridges. So they start bathtubing everywhere in Canada. The thing goes on in Vancouver, and so you have to look at the soil, in my opinion. In some ways in Vancouver, my partner was MatCon. So I got backing from MatCon, and I didn't have the kind of money to do the first job I did, which was Brantford Hospital. So I did Brantford Hospital on dry sands in 2001 and proved that you could do things with shotcrete. It was next to operating rooms in a working hospital. And we instrumented the heck out of it. Nat and I spent Saturdays and Sundays there making sure it was right. And I got 4 millimeters of movement through precision monitoring, which was actually less ground disturbance than secant walls would be. So my pitch is that pick the right system. And
yeah, well, why do they create a blanket then? I don't understand.
Well, what happens is they go to permit. The structural engineer and the owner and the architect go to permit with a basic scheme. So they don't necessarily go with the best scheme. They go with the one they did last time. If you look
What's been approved?
Well, if you're drawing a 1.2 meter subway wall section, it's a lot easier just to cut and paste the section. Yeah.
But that doesn't innovate. That doesn't move things forward. That doesn't...
Well, you're right, Manny. If you look at HVAC, I know you had a lot of guys with HVAC on your show.
Yeah.
And I love HVAC because I have unique patents in that area. But, okay, so then after Matthews, in 93, they had some problems. So then everyone's jumping ship. So I went to work at Sutherland Schultz, which was an M&E contractor. I was hired in as president. Okay. And that was in 93. And I think
Still in the Corps?
What? No, it's in Kitchener-Waterloo.
Okay.
Famous multi-trade. 17 multi-trade groups. Got into industrial contracting. Wanted to learn it. But then they canned my ass out of there within 6 months. And, frankly, you get into some of the truth telling. And I tell the truth all the time. I probably should have quit drinking earlier because alcohol would give me a bit of a temper. And then I was in construction, you're an outside guy.
Which is another kind of drink.
Yeah. I never got caught for impaired, but people who know me know that I don't drink now.
Yeah.
I don't smoke weed. I used to smoke a lot of weed. Like it was good to sleep at night, right? You come home. And I just grew up in the 70s, right? So I don't know if we won't get into your habits.
What's today's generation's excuse, man? If we were using
well, I'm going to say shout out to all the young people listening. The sooner you get lay off alcohol, the better your career will go.
Of course,
because everybody has a bit of an effect with it. Mm-hmm. Now, here I am preaching something, but nonetheless, I never got caught for impaired or anything like that. But now, if you're driving and you've smoked a joint, you could get busted. So. Anyway, that's...
Well, these days it's more like you're not getting busted. You could just keep on doing it. It won't matter. But that's a whole other political turn. I'd love to get some insight from you about OBC and what you don't like and how you've seen it change over the years. It's constantly changing.
Yeah, the building code?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the main thing is, how would you have a building code? Does it make any sense that the rebar ratio should be based on the amount of cubic meters? Now, no. I've been working on concrete for a while, and I've got some interesting stuff going with concrete. So have you ever heard of crystalline concrete? Like concrete admixture that's crystalline?
That sounds familiar for some reason.
I did a patent pending with an engineering firm, and it's patent pending in the U.S. It's called Texon, T-X-O-N.
Okay.
And so we use basaltic fibers, which are basically really inert volcanic rock, so you got a lower footprint than steel, right? You just melt it. You don't smelt it. The issue we have with the planet, it isn't CO2. The chemicals are the issue.
Yeah.
The chemicals are the issue. So when the chemicals, and when they keep geoengineering everything, you're screwing the ozone layer. That's the issue, right? But nonetheless, I have to say that because, maybe somebody out there will listen, and maybe we won't put the chemicals in smelting rebar to put it in 5-foot slabs that aren't necessary. I mean, can somebody connect the dots here? I hope so. I mean, there are a lot of people who know that my ideas are right. How I presented them maybe could have been better. In other words, you can't really change City Hall overnight. Michael DeAndrea would have changed it if he hadn't retired.
Well, listen, there's a lot of good people that got into the game and they just unfortunately got out or became the villain. That's how I look at politicians, right? And they just keep the wheels missing, keep on spinning. But the problem I find is that Toronto is a very corrupt city when it comes to moving forward. You know what I mean? And you're right about the cut and paste because, so what's the issue with engineers coming in and looking at a new structure and having a new idea? Like you've had a bunch of new ideas. Is it really that challenging to present and stick to these new ideas, or is it just a lot easier and you're still going to get the same payday, if not more? You're going to make more money if you just cut and paste from the past and present it now and get it done instead of trying to fight that fight to do something that's better.
Yeah, so it all depends on who initiates permit, right? So, an architect, there's a famous saying, Dave Miller used to say this, that an architect was an engineer with his head kicked in. So, that was a famous saying because you get a guy who wants to draw anything, but who has to pay for it, right?
I love that one, man. That's another T-shirt.
Yeah, I gotta make sure that some of these legacy guys get some due, right? I've had some great mentors.
Yeah.
And Field and from Norm Como to Dave Miller to Bill Lardner. And then, Dick Cherney was the chief engineer and president at Matthews. In one noteworthy job we did there, we did the Welland Canal rehab. So the Welland Canal rehab was very interesting. And what they would do is 7-year program, and you'd have every lock would be worked on for 7 years, like different phases of. I learned a lot. So we drill off, like these monoliths are big retaining walls, step retaining walls.
Yeah.
So you'd line drill the top and you'd blast the thing into. Very impressive. Everyone watches the big. Then you go down, break out the rubble. And then you'd scale the wall. And then you would, you'd get 1,000, after you wash it, we'd put 3-foot forms in, 2-foot forms, 3-foot forms, gang forms. And then we'd wash it. And then very little rebar. And you get 1,000 pounds square foot adhesion, pull off. So I started getting into the idea of, well, geez, this is a big wasteful opportunity. Mm-hmm. And then I got into, which I think was one of the things that, my partner at ECM didn't really like because I was getting into products. Well, I met you, I was in products.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And, Jens Holfel, who was a famous formulator from Vellicid in Germany, he said, concrete won't leak unless it cracks. So it makes sense, right? Like if you do...
It's porous, it absorbs, but it doesn't unless it's a continuous form of moisture, right?
Well, those are really good questions. Like you've got enough experience to ask the right question. So what I've been working on, I found a guy who's got a world patent, and it's called Chem Concrete. And so these guys have a 5 hybrid dry, and all you got to do is add water, and it turns into a what they call a yogurt. So then in that yogurt, because a ready-mix plant wants to inject, they want to inject the load, right? So you got to get rid of the dry admix stuff. Now, crystalline is something that's big, like Crichton in Zypex. Apparently the story is, somebody was telling me the other day that there was a husband and wife, and that's how they broke up. And so one started Zypex and one started Crichton. So they've got crystalline. So crystalline apparently grows crystals, right? Okay. So it grows crystals. Now, to get a warranty from those guys, you can't. The only way you get a warranty is if you have a 1/8 crack max. Well, the only way to get a 1/8 crack is to fill it with rebar. Okay, so the opportunity is to use fibers and better admix. So then you could get into large systems that basically wouldn't crack. And if you increase the impermeability, like Chem Concrete, if you look at the ratio, they're quite polite. So their papers, I can send you the papers.
Yeah,
spread around, but the papers. I'm just getting into this one lately. So the papers, if you look at crystalline, it's, let's say, a perm of 6 or 7. We won't say what they are, but chem concrete's 1. So with that 1, if you put fibers in it, why do you put rebar? If it doesn't crack and you've got a 12-inch wall, there's some cases where you're going to have to justify shear and different things. There's a hot company today in Toronto is MST Rebar.
Okay.
A guy named Bornia. He'd be a good guy to have on your show.
Sure, love to have him on here.
And I'm sure a lot of these guys, they need to meet a guy like you because it gives you a platform. So, and they have the companies to do it. Anyway, he went to Concordia for his master's, and he has detailers, and he's got a spiral glass rebar. So he does the whole thing. And MTO, for instance, is a friend of his, Ministry of Transportation. If we can get into MTO with chem concrete, we can change the nature of infrastructure in Toronto. Because all you need is traction, right? And so I told Bornia, he was down at ACI, and I didn't go there. I don't go to those things anymore. But he told Bornia, that he, Bornia said, well, there's this new thing. I got to Bornia, and so Bornia, he wants to use the glass bar. Because if you do that in a bridge deck, you're salt resistant. If you put chemcrete in it, right, then you don't have...
So you're making sense, Martin. That's the
Well, yeah. I've been watching rehab for a while. One of my goals was to fix the Gardner. And eventually HCM Shotcrete did do the patch repairs, and they did it with King Products. King Products was bought by Sika. Now, when you get these companies buying each other, it's not necessarily better for innovation. When Sika buys something, they strip it down and take the best
They're
SKUs.
buying it out of each other.
Yeah,
They're taking it out of the equation.
Recently Master Builders was bought by Sika.
I'm sure there's a lot of acquisitions going on, right?
Oh, because, what do we got in the world? 3 companies that own everything. Vanguard, BlackRock.
Yeah, all that fiasco.
Yeah, so indirectly. Now, we can't change that.
Why isn't Canada not taking cues? Okay, listen, I don't think that Canada is the epicenter of concrete, but I would like to think that, I'm going to guess, maybe Dubai is the epicenter of concrete these days. I don't know.
Yes, I've met with people recently that have, like Chem Concrete got a $5 million order in the Middle East. So that's just admix, right? Mm-hmm. And they've got a price point that's only, from what we can see, trying to do the math on it, $40 a cubic meter. Well, crystalline's $70, and they're asking you to fill it full of rebar. So the real impact of that, but because there's a detail that's been copied before, they ends up with all this rebar.
See, that's where I go back to, is it challenging for an engineer to come up and then present new ideas? Is it just going to take longer to get the approval process, so they just give up and say, forget it, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to cut and paste now?
Yeah,
we need to get the project done.
Why be the pioneer?
Yeah.
And so Toronto also has a pretty sophisticated review department. So they want for instance, they want a hydrogeology report that would basically say how much water there's going to be per acre. And so then they're saying you can't combine...
Per acre?
Yeah, let's say it's a P4.
Okay.
And you got 2 acres or 3 acres. Conceivably, the total perimeter is generating the water from the fills. Well, there's some of those jobs that are dry at the bottom before they start putting this raft slab in. So how was it that...
So is that being quantified?
Well, we all see it.
It's being ignored.
I did the police station job with Deep and Anchor. We did a joint venture in... what used to happen is you did lagged walls away from buildings. Yep. And then you did caisson or secant walls next to buildings because of movement control. Yep. And then I created a hybrid system at HCM. I call it bypass shotcrete. So I could make the pile. I put a tab on the pile, and then I ran 15M through it, and then I shotcreted the front of the pile, so I got a bridge deck effect. So I dropped the size of the pile. Yeah. And so when I got on my own, I didn't have the platform to do the design build, but I created a patent called FEH2O lock. So then I started working on 2 layers of 5-inch and telling people, put that everywhere, get the bridge deck effect, and take out the waterproofing, which is a tremendous schedule because it won't crack. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't crack, remember what Jens Hoffel said.
It won't leak.
It won't leak. And then I put a 18-inch chimney drain in the middle of every bay. So you've got clay that cuts open, You could put the chimney drain. You can shotcrete it. We used to get, at HCM, we used to get easy $1,000, 1,000 square feet a day with 6 men. And that's quicker than lagging. Quicker than, and so you didn't have to do the caisson wall, you got down quicker. What's happening in Toronto today? They've got to do those 5-foot raft subs, right? So they go in there and they do geothermal, Subterra's doing geothermal, and they put it in from grade before they start. So they have a way of drilling down 300, 400, 500 feet, mud drilling, and they might get one a day. Well, my geothermal and my wall system, you could put the geothermal down below. You could do 4 holes a day, and you could do 600 condos because I use evaporative cooling. So in that sense, we'll cover maybe those patents in a minute. I don't know how we're doing in terms of, I wanted to share some.
We got plenty of time. Of time. Okay, dude, there's no rush, man. This is fascinating stuff.
Let's go to the FE patents and go down to.
So what kind of projects are you dealing with these days, Martin? Like, what are you pulling off of?
Well, I'm trying to get into mining for KN.
Oh, yeah?
Because
where do you want to go? Sorry, where do you want to go?
Go down to FE BTU cell.
Sorry, which one?
FE BTU cell. It might FE BTU cell. So there's this is, let's say, an early drawing. And what you have there is you have an open hole condition.
Yeah.
And what you do is you create a water table.
Okay.
So then the water table, this goes to a system I saw from Ape Geothermal. And they abandoned the system because they found that it only worked in high water table. But I remembered that, going to that tree. I remembered.
Okay.
So then what I did is I created my own water table. So I create 2 steel liners. So the inside one is closed. So it's a water furnace. You know what a water furnace is?
Yeah.
So you circulate the water, and you're usually getting 25 PSI in there because of the heat, the water pump.
Okay.
So then what I do is I just crack a ball valve, and I overflow the pond because I don't want static water, right? So then on the outside, you see the gravel on the outside?
Yep.
So that's an evaporative medium. So when you evaporate water, it's 860 BTUs per pound.
Okay.
So if you feed that puppy 2 gallons an hour, and it's usually intermittent, you put let's say 12 hours, right? You end up with tremendous, like the COP as an air conditioner, the best you get in geothermals, 4. I could do, how many of these holes can you do a day with a clay drilling rig?
You were saying you can get 4 of these done a day?
You could do 4 8-footers.
Wow.
So what I do is I scale it. So if you drill let's say a 96-foot hole, 96-inch hole, then a 72-inch liner, and then a 24-inch inner, right? You can get 30 ton. So 30 ton heat cool, right? And you basically have a return on energy of 10. So instead of 4, you're getting 10.
Come a little closer.
Yeah, instead of 4, you're getting 10.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where.
So that's one of your patents.
That's probably one of my best ones.
Okay.
But then I have another one called FEGeo Wind, and so FEGeo Wind would be you take that same thing and keep in mind. Let's say you're let's say
Geo Wind. All right.
Yeah, so basically take that center structure, that center pipe, and you put a windmill on top, you got a free energy device. You're basically put it in a windy area. Let's say you're doing a greenhouse. So if you had a greenhouse that was 30 feet and you put that on the outside and it was windy, then you could get away without you're totally off grid. I have one of those at my house in Godrich. So that's a test site. Now I hit a high water table, and then there's a little bit of resonance with the stiffness of that inner pipe. So and there's a water furnace inside that building, right?
Yeah.
And so then I turned it off in the winter, but now I've got a plan to stiffen this particular insulation. So the overflow, you see the little hole at the side?
Is it always constantly submerged? Is that the idea, or is it?
Well, you want to maintain the water level so you don't have any stagnant water.
Got it.
Right? But the evaporative cooling is what you're after.
Okay.
You know, when I was, one of the first businesses I did was, we go suddenly. So then I had to become an entrepreneur. So I started HC Equipment, and I bought into a company. It cost me $10,000 to buy in Northern Industrial Fans and Blowers. My friend Jim Sadler, he's still there.
Okay.
So you know he's he's basically somebody that I would credit with. Well, his partner was pretty sharp, and so his partner got us all involved. He said, let's start a new company. We called it NISCO. So then I stayed in that for quite a number of years, and I got sales experience that way. So then I was able to use my contacts a bit. I got into humidification. We had a humidification line called Neptronic. And a lot of the guys that might be listening that are M&E would know the Scott and Dave from.
They're probably familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's out of Montreal, but it's a steam boiler, cleanable. It took over the Nortec business. So, I learned that 860 BTUs, if you heat it, it'll generate, you sort of have that ratio. It goes forward or back. So there's certain things that are true in nature. Mm-hmm. And it's true that water is a tremendous resource. And we should respect it, whether it's in the ground or not in the ground. If it's causing us to put rebar in, we're not paying attention. Like this idea of the 5-foot raft slab, it's really hopefully somebody will listen and they'll say, oh, I'm going to call that guy.
So this is Toronto. I go back corruption.
Well, I don't know if it's corruption. Certainly it's a resistance to change. And it's a consolidation of engineering. Mm-hmm. So when they bought up all the old engineering companies to do P3 work, those were Europeans that came in. And yeah, they probably, with two bidders, you got something that might discontinue, right? And there's a lot of work. I know that Geoforum does a lot of work with the problem of let's say. So what Geoforum,
are they building their tunnels? Like they build precast concrete sectionals, right? Of tunnels, right?
Well, it's not all. Yes, there's all different forms of tunneling, right? So you've got definitely tunnel machines, and you have different systems of shotcrete and cross passages, and I mean it's definitely some sections are tunneled, some sections are, but they all leak. So where KN has succeeded is by being focused. Another guy that I would give honorable mention to was an early partner of KN's, Adiz Viral, and he was actually Adiz who actually knew about the waterproofing TPH company.
Where are they leaking, Martin? Are they leaking at the joints of where they're connecting all the forms?
Typically when they do the waterproofing, it breaches. So you might end up with, let's say, a bubble or improper situation, pretty cut and cover might breach. But, what KN does is he's able to use geopolymer injections. So with geopolymer injections, you're able to, no matter what the material, if you do... If it's leaking in a concrete wall, he can actually permeate the concrete, and then it sets up. He controls set. We all know about polyurethane that fixes houses, right? Yeah. So take that to a European technique and apply it in Toronto, because the people in Toronto that had problems, like I think it was that Metrolinx job, the first one, crosstown, and so it was ambitious and. I remember Steve Fogarty said they'll never do it, on the price. So you end up with claims because you can't have a company like Ellis Don, go broke, right? There's sympathy for it. They have political connections. Mm-hmm. But also, I don't want them to suffer. But to some extent, that bid set the stage. So, but people learned after, right? People learned after, and subsequent phases are being bid properly. KN's got the work from all these places. Like, he's really the only show in town that can do that properly.
So, since I got you in the studio here, because I've always spoken about this on the show several times, because I know that Toronto's a shit show regarding our new mayor and the taxes. And the latest news is they're going to start doing a rain tax for hard surfaces. You got hard surfaces on your property, and they're going to calculate it through a drone and determine how much rainwater your dwelling is expelling into the Toronto system, right?
So you're going to get taxed. So they're saying that we're going to tax you for the treatment plant
because it's overflowing their 100-year-old system, right?
Right. So that's backing up in the street. Connect the dots.
Correct.
So if you go down behind the shoring, right, the water won't make it to the bottom of the clay. Like, because every time I cut a bypass job, I go down 5 feet, right? I get in 1,000 square feet. The soil's standing dry, or I couldn't do the shotcrete. I put the drain, and then, at that point, let's say 30 feet down, if we brought the city there, if they let us do that in the city, or we've done it in Hamilton.
It's bone dry.
It's dry. So then your better rate of evaporation exceeds the rate of leakage. So,
where I was going with that is that
that's Chow, right?
That's Chow. And that they, at the start of the year, they announced the fact that they were not going to put any more money into infrastructure of all of Toronto's roadways, and they were just going to put the money into the Gardiner. And now recently, the Gardiner was just reduced down to 2 lanes, and that's going to happen for the next, 2 years or something like that. So good luck on trying to get into the core through the Gardiner, right? And good luck. Toronto's just
why? Because they want to do the barriers.
They have to repair sections of the Gardiner, right?
So that it takes 25 years for them to have to do that rehab. And it's possible today with MST rebar and chem concrete and basaltic fibers, because it's a good idea to put fibers in, that you wouldn't have to rehab that for 100 years.
Well, see, that's where I'm going with this. What I've always talked about is knock down the Gardiner. I'm fine with that. But build a tunnel underneath and make you go from 427 to the DVP, bypassing the core if you never want to go to the core. So you don't have that congestion. Well, but is that feasible in a city like Toronto that's 100% corrupt? Like, where it's like, how much is that going to cost?
Well, you think it's corrupt? I don't know. I believe Canadians are a little better than Americans, but I'm
not talking about the Canadian citizens. I'm talking about the Canadian politicians.
Well, I like to think that, geez, I don't know them, and
I'm just basing it off of actions. Like for a new mayor to come in and start talking about a rain tax, and start talking about how we're not going to put any more money into fixing any of the roadways, which Toronto doesn't have the best roadways to begin with, and we're just going to focus all that money on the Gardiner. And then all of a sudden, we're also going to get help from the Premier, who's already doing the casino over Ontario Place. So it's like, yeah, sure, let's bring a casino in, because that actually helps the economy quite a bit. It doesn't do anything for drugs or money or anything illegal, right? It's perfectly safe. So it's just, that's where the corruption talk comes from me when I'm talking about that stuff. So I just look at Toronto like, we are such a big city with so much opportunity to build innovative new ideas. And if you've got what they keep on saying, a Gardiner that's fallen apart, like you said, 25 years, and you could do something to it that will actually last a century, why not do that? But it's almost like they don't want to fix it. They don't want it to last. How often do we change the streetcar tracks on each street? I'm starting to see it again. They'll pick a certain lane, a certain street, and all of a sudden start ripping up all the old streetcar tracks. And then what happens to all the businesses on that street? What happens to everything?
Yeah, so then they're putting a lot of rebar in there. So what happens with rebar in concrete is the temperature and expansion coefficient isn't a match. So you end up with it causing the cracks. People think that think concrete rebar is, if you say, why is so much rebar? The first level of sophistication would be, because of cracks. If I don't put that rebar because of cracks, it's because of that code, right? It's not because of cracks. So you're better off to put no rebar in, put fibers in. And you're better off to put Borneo's bar from MST rebar. Now, the MTO is onto it. And Borneo's bar, actually, is very close to the same temperature and expansion coefficient of the concrete paste. As the concrete paste. And so basaltic is exactly the same. And basaltic is volcanic rock, right? So they take that rock out of Turkey, and they ship it to China, and they process it into fibers, and Texon is a very good line of products. So I'm dealing with a guy in LA that's like me, and we're dealing with Texon. He's dealing with Texon in Texas, Texas and Ontario. David Lawn's a great guy, and he's a master's of civil. He's got 120 people, M&E and whatnot, in Windsor. I think he had an office in Toronto when COVID happened. He pulled back, but nonetheless, we worked on this patent together, and there's 3 inventors on it. But we use nanocolloidal silica. Now, nanocolloidal silica is very good. It's kind of, the nanotechnology is the future. And I sold, when I was meeting you, I used to sell spray lock. Okay. So spray lock was a silicate. Yep. And what you have in a concrete slab on grade, you've got exposure there. More exposure if you're putting more rebar in. So if you compact it, put stone underneath it, there's a lot of that can go without rebar on slab on grade. Once you start going up the walls, you'll have a hard time doing anything. But, in terms of MST bar, I'm a big proponent of what Borneo's doing, because when you take a glass bar, you can carry a lot of glass bar. Like a man could go place glass bar.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's onto the right thing. He took a master's in composite.
So why aren't we
technology.
seeing more of that then? Just
Well,
because
I think he's got one plant in Toronto.
Okay.
He's got a small one in Buffalo. He ships to the guy I know in LA.
Okay.
And so I hear a lot about the utility there. You know, LA is a tough market, you know, in terms of price. They've got huge concrete practices there that are, you got to be cheap there. But I don't think we're doing anything cheap. Like, in other words, if you look at labor and you look at time, you got to save cost and schedule.
Yeah.
So that's value engineering.
Yeah.
And so I pick systems. I can recommend systems. Whether I'll ever have the influence again, probably not unless I had another platform. You know, but certainly, hopefully, we continue to have discussions like this. And your podcast does a tremendous service by pointing out best practices. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think you understand that rebar is causing the cracks. And if it doesn't crack, it's waterproof, normal concrete. But if you then put chemical concrete in it,
It's a different game at that point.
yeah, it's a different game. And if you put basaltic fiber, or I think Barney also sells glass fiber. So you end up with whatever assemblies you can. Let's say the Jersey barrier on the side of the road. I mean, what is that? You got a railing on it, right? On those elevated bridges.
Yep.
You have to hold the car from going through.
Yep.
Right. So then the glass bar can do that. I mean, when do you ever see a car do anything but scrape that anyway? You ever seen a car go through?
Yeah.
So, but yet it starts to break down with the road salt. So
See, it's interesting you say that because it's exactly that. It fails because of the rebar. It doesn't fail because of impact or use.
right.
And Mother Nature has got something to
It's
do with it as
expansion
well.
and contraction.
Exactly. Yeah.
In a salt environment.
Yeah.
You got to put the salt.
So why don't we start fighting science with science, basically, at that point?
Well, I'm using the logic on you one person at a time, right? I only have so many patents.
Was it like that back in the 80s and 90s? Were we fighting these same battles back then?
Well, they built the elevated gardener in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so they fixed it a few times. And, big jobs, eh? I mean, you're dealing with removal of the decks, pier to pier. And then you're putting rebar back in again. So
you're putting something back in that's going to eventually fail.
Well, we're seeing it now. The gardener's been done a couple times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of gardener down by the exhibition that's no more. They just say, well, we don't need that.
They chopped it up now right after Jarvis, right? So it's chopped up from there on. All you can do now is just go north and grab the DVP, but you have to get off at Jarvis. There's no extension at that point, which I guess the east end of the town is like, great, wonderful. We don't have an eyesore looking out there. I'm like, okay, well, cool. You know what? Society has cars. Society needs cars, and cars are relevant in a city. So we need roadways that make sense for cars, as long as it makes sense for bikes and pedestrian and public. Equal balance is how I look at it.
Yeah, certainly we're after more people walking, but, the tax on rain is, and then they're making the rain.
It's just ridiculous.
When you think about it, they make
since I got you in here, I'm sure that you guys were probably having a bunch of conversations regarding the Baltimore Bridge.
Well, I know about the Baltimore Bridge, but I know it's not what it appears. But Dan, can we show?
What do you want to pop up now?
I want to show
I love cliffhangers, man.
I want to.
What do you want to pull up?
I want to pull up the bow job. Dan, can you get that one? The bow job from Calgary.
I think it was So she's got that. Oh, there. Oh, which one? Okay.
Okay, so this would be.
Where's this? This is in Calgary. No.
Yeah. So there's the bow there. That was.
Beautiful.
That was the most expensive building ever built in North America. So the guy who built that was hired by H&R. So Jack Matthews built that. I used to work for Jack Matthews.
And back in 07?
So he calls me up, right?
Okay.
And I remember it was a
Hang
weekend.
On, the mic.
Sorry, bud.
Yeah.
I remember the weekend he called me. Like I'd go in every week, every day at HCM, so that I'd go in and clean up my desk. And so he called me and said, would you have a look at this job? And I said, well, Jack, I don't have anything in Calgary. And so he said, oh, please just have a look at it, right? So so this would be below grade, right? I'm a below grade specialist. So the eventually that thing, in Canada had it, and they had two divisions. They had gas and they had oil. And so by the time that got built, both of those divisions weren't anymore. So it's a beautiful building, though.
Yeah.
And the Bow River, famous architect. So if you can get down to the actual,
which one you want to get to?
Okay, keep going further. That's an HCM article, so I think we're going to see it. No, this is just general HCM, eh? So I don't know if it'll show the bow.
You have any?
I did a post on that, Danny.
Yeah.
Can you find that bow post? So basically, what I did is I did a perched wall. So if you go to is there
a website that we could look at?
Well, yeah. If you try projects on HCM site, I haven't been there for a while, and then.
There's the Eglinton LRT.
Yeah, so there's shotcrete right
Slope,
on clay. See the ground in Toronto, eh? See the clay?
Yeah.
Anyway, that post on the bow, but basically it was an 80-foot cut. Okay, an 80-foot cut. And the bidder, North American, was $17.5 million. So I bid the job on an alternate, right? And what I did, knowing that once I got through the bow gravel, keep in mind I worked there, did a working bridge through the gravel, it's 15-inch minus.
Okay.
Like it's an old glacial river, right?
Okay.
From the mountains. So you might have to, Dan, you can find that post if you can. I posted on LinkedIn not long ago. So what I did was I did the secant wall in the gravel. Okay. I brought the Luffer casing rigs to get through the gravel. I hired everybody. I hired 12 people from Fleming, small diameter, and I started HCM in Calgary. And so our price was $9.5 million, and the other guy was $17 million.
17.
So, but the big thing is schedule. So then I ended up with a big change order on it, and I ended up maybe at 13. But where would they have ended? Would have been ended up, right? And you would have had leaks. So they had allowed for 750 gallons. 750 gallons an hour. And so they paid Leadcore, Mike Mikulewski, they paid him so much to deal with pumping. So then at the end of the job, there was a laborer that was moving a 2-inch pump around. And finally, Matthew said, don't worry about it. You don't have to do. I had a dry hole. Mm-hmm. So I put a secant wall on the top, and then I perched it. And I put that 40-foot wall into the shale, sedimentary shale. And then I went down 80 feet of shotcrete. And I did a saw nail wall in the rock and saved them 6 months on schedule. And we left the money there, and we started HCM Contractors in Calgary. And that was in 2007.
Yeah.
You know, I'd started doing shotcrete with my partner, Matt Con. And I could get men out of Vancouver. So I brought shotcrete back to Toronto after Matthews folded their tent. National Shoring was the company then. All the foundation guys in Toronto got together and said, well, let's all agree we're not going to do any shotcrete. Well, you know, then I did start doing shotcrete from my own company. And it was a tremendous advantage. So I have some really good shotcrete pictures, like the Smith residence. I think I might have sent you some of them, Dan. But the Smith residence, hillside lots, you know, this is sort of a general website of, like, you see,
Smith,
right,
right
okay,
there?
leave that one there.
Okay.
So that's in Toronto.
Okay.
Now, the benefit of that is, you know, it fit the architectural exactly. So you end up being able to carve it out in dry soil. And that's before I even got into special mixes. But I did a lot with self-drilling bars. So when you look at a micropile, we used to just put a self-drilling bar in. I dealt with Do It, Egg, and Titan, and we could do that way more per footage per day. So it's time, right? Time, footage, and that was a good job. We took that on for the Isherwood gave us the design.
So a 100-year plus life expectancy.
Well, that shocker, yeah. I mean, that got waterproofing in the end. But when that was before I innovated the concrete industry. So the idea would be, today I would use chem concrete, and today I would use a double bypass. So I'd cover the anchor heads, and then I would go a final layer of 5-inch, and it would never leak. And then I would save the waterproofing costs, right? Because waterproofing is bituminous. It's a heavy footprint, right?
Well, yeah, for sure.
I mean, even blindside, most of the time you're better to drain something. But I look at different products, and I try to. Sometimes I'll post on LinkedIn a better product just to help people out. LinkedIn's a good platform.
So where are you getting all of your today's ideas?
Well, I would say, sometimes I'll dream about the jobs I did, and I think, I could, but like I love the industry. So then the idea would be, what can I give back? Mm-hmm. I have the trademark in the States called Earth Honoring Systems. That's HONORING. So most of my patents I have are Canada and the U.S. I didn't do anything in the world because I wasn't really organized. I was learning about patents. But the main thing is I have a very unique geothermal. So when you look at what it could do in Africa or Texas is all clay. So I've decided to try and sell some of these U.S. patents in Texas. And I have some contacts there. ADSC, American Drilled Shaft Contractors, they started in Texas. I mean, the first holes were drilled in the clay in Texas. And that started a long time ago. So
I assume that Texas is embracing this and they kind of see it.
Oh, yeah. Like I talked to Doug Watson the other day. So he's going to help me out with the up-to-date list of the contractors there that may buy these patents and finally get rid of my ex-wife. So. We all have some challenges. Hopefully you won't.
That's called life. You're in construction.
You only been married once?
No, I was never married, man.
Oh, well.
No.
Good. That's why you got all the big money.
No, I do not. What do you think of the tradespeople today?
Oh, I think they're,
they're different than the tradespeople from yesterday.
They're, it might be, why do you say, because they're younger?
No, not that. When I say different, I mean that they're good and bad for different reasons, right? I think there was a lot more hardworking tradespeople back in the day, and I think that there's a lot more smarter tradespeople today, right? Now, are they working harder today? We don't know. Like, I think that there might be a big chunk of them are just punching the clock and just doing the job, and they're not, like you said at the very beginning of the show, you would plant certain thoughts and ideas about stuff that you wanted to try to pull off, and you would let it permeate between the tradespeople. And then the very next day, a conversation would come from that, and you would start discussing how to solve this problem. I don't hear of that kind of stuff happening today with the tradespeople of today. I think there's a line drawn between the engineer, between the architect, between the tradesperson, between the designer. I think there's clear lines drawn, and they want most tradespeople to stay on their side of the fence. You're just being tasked to do the job, just do the job. We don't really want you to vocalize any thoughts about what you think should be done, but I've always looked at it like tradespeople are always on the ground. They're always on the sites. They're always working. They're always doing things, and they without the degree, without the ring, have some insight into what has worked in the past on past projects, and possibly have some insight on future projects. Is that not the case?
Yes, I would say there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. Tradespeople are the salt of the earth. I mean, they know how 100%. They know how to use tools.
Yeah,
right. I'm no good at using tools, but I know how to use tradespeople. A tradesperson, for not being derogatory, is the best tool you got.
Yeah,
a man's mind.
Yeah,
right. And there's a lot of guys that aren't asked their opinions. We also have a demographic where the immigrants we had in the 60s are different than the 70s and the 80s.
Yep.
And you get, cultural.
Yep.
So, where the Italians and Portuguese replaced by people with the same desire to work, right? And then those things, I think, enter into it. But I think if you hire farmers, you got a chance.
Oh, I agree
with
you.
One of the good guys we hired in HCM, one of the early operations managers, was Neil Houghton. And Neil was a really strong people person from the north. And I said to Jason, who do you know who we can bring up in operations? And he says, well, the hardest worker I know, well, that's check the box on that. Somebody who wants to work hard and get ahead. that's pretty good.
Yep.
And sure enough, Neil was a great leader, and the men really liked him. And today, he's president of Powell Foundations. So a lot of the people that we hired and brought up in a culture of teamwork became the leaders in the foundation business. Like most of the people in Toronto, through Deep, Anchor, and HCM, they're the leaders today. And you would have, I'm pretty sure there'd be, from that original 3 companies, Frankie was big, and then they were Belgian, and they had the Frankie pile. You might have heard of it. Okay. Anyway, they had like a tank-like structure, and it was just Belgium, and they would move it along, and then they'd plant it, and then they'd do a hammer and drive the tube down. And so if we go into the FE patents, let me show you something there under patents. See if you can find the FECM pile.
FECM pile. Right there, the second last one. Yeah, there it is.
Now, this is a very simple thing, but what you have in Toronto, keep in mind it's clay, right?
Okay.
And so, when I was in the 80s, in 85, 86, we used to load test the rock with Miller and Lardner. And we would we'd make our own, we'd weld up almost like a pad of oil. And then we would put on we could put a tube on it, or we could measure the pressure accurately, and we put some grout around it. And we tested the rock in Toronto to 15,000 pounds a square foot. Now that's 1,500 kPa. And today, they test the rock to 10,000.
Did you say 1,500 kPa?
No, 15,000.
15,000 back then.
Yeah, it was, so 7,500 was what we would get. And I can work, but being Canadian, you can work with metric. Let's say it's 150 tons a square foot.
Wow.
So then we would prove that didn't move. So that was 2 to 1. So then we would design it at 75 tons a square foot. Well, something happened in Toronto where all of a sudden someone says, well, you can't go down a caisson hole. Like we used to go down caisson holes. We used to send Rico and Emilio down the caisson hole with a short shovel, and it was safe. We never had a problem. They've had a problem since because the company got so big. There was a guy that I know the guy who it happened to, and he wasn't paying attention, and he got kicked into the hole upside down, and he got augured out. So they said you can't go down. Anyway, this is not a good story.
Yeah.
But that's from a busy market. Now, what I want to say is today, the same rock hasn't changed. So they make you go 3 meters into the rock. We used to go 1 meter in the rock because we didn't have the power to go more. We got 150 tons a square foot. We designed it at 75. Today they go 3 meters in the same rock, and then they get.
What are you getting?
You're getting half. No, you're getting. They're only given 5,000. So they're only given 100 tons, and they're only given 5,000 kPa or 50 tons.
So you're going further into the rock, and you're getting less.
Yeah.
How does that work? How does that?
There's never been a soldier pile in Toronto fail. There's never been a building settle on that rock.
That's what I mean. Is like there's no precedent for failures to dictate what we're being asked to do today.
That's a good way of putting it, Manny.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm seeding some of those ideas in your head because, you have a platform and maybe more design build guys could come on that are civil.
Yeah.
And there's some good. And you know what happened in Toronto? They started doing the excavation and the shoring together. So the Italians bought drill rigs. So then you had a change. All of a sudden, you had 2 prices mixed into one. We never did that at HCM. We were always focused on, we think this support system should be this or this pile should be this. Now, this particular pile is called a combined modulus pile. So what you have, let's say that you're going down and you're on rock, and it's end bearing. And so the rock is 5,000.
Okay.
Now 5,000 kPa, right?
All right.
Well, they say that you can't take skin friction and end bearing together. So this is a combined modulus pile. This is a pile where I might be
It becomes one unit once it's...
And the reason is because all you have to do here, because I can't clean the bottom.
Yeah.
So what I do is I put clear stone in the bottom.
Okay.
I take a piccolo tube, which would be a heavy pile.
Yeah.
Like a heavy structural, right?
Yeah.
And then I tap that stone. It's incompressible. Clear stone's incompressible.
Yeah, it won't keep on going.
So then you basically end up with, you could load test it up and test that friction up, and then you could basically get another 50% down. So you could get 300% of what they're giving on the rock now.
What are you getting with this?
Well, I'm getting the sum of it. So what they say, Manny, is they say that you can't combine end bearing and friction in clay.
And the reason why you can't?
Well, because they say they don't move together. Because you got to have strain compatibility. So, if you're going to go down an inch, then you can't push the rock an inch.
But see, this makes sense to me.
Well, yeah, it's a sweet little patent, and so that would be, in my opinion, a way for somebody who's listening, a structural engineer who, let's say, is working for a developer, and there is some independent structural engineers that need to get market share. You may not get it from the big guy. Mm-hmm. But if you can justify it, and the way to justify it, we did it all the time, is you do a load test. So if you pull up or pull down, push down, that's a pretty simple frame. Mm-hmm. You put reactions in, you do a load test and prove it. But somebody has to, let's say, pay for the load test. But if you amortize that over a whole building of 2 or 3 acres, you can see how it makes sense.
Yeah.
When they go down and put that raft slab in, they're on rock. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply there. They don't need the raft slab, keep in mind. But if you're dealing with a P3 or P2, right, then you could use this type of pile.
What's the primary reason for the raft slab? Is it for the waterproofing, or is it for the structural?
Well, it's because they
it's the waterproofing?
The raft slab is because Toronto said we have to tank the basements.
Every single one.
Yeah. And so then everyone in Canada followed. And
what a waste of time and money.
Well, time and money, yeah. It's easily time and money. The time is actually worth more than concrete and steel.
I mean, it looks cool, and it's pretty cool to be a part of that team, and it's like pretty cool to be a part of all the truckers that are involved with it and the company that's bringing all the it's all cool. It's all coolness. It looks cool. It's great, but it's not really necessary based on what we already have down there.
Okay, so let's say you're doing a P4. P4 is pretty common, 4 levels underground. You got to take 5 feet of clay and rock out of there. So those trucks have to go up that ramp with diesel, get into traffic, right? And get out of the city.
Bring it to a site, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you might get into Mississauga and they could use the soil. But generally you're going outside the perimeters of the 427 and the Gardner. Mm-hmm. It's pretty rare that you're going to dump it in there. So you got huge companies like York Excavating, and you've got GFI, and you've got a lot of people that don't necessarily have a motivation to get rid of that 5 feet of clay. They just assume get paid for that, and everybody, that's where you might get a little bit of, hey, why would we lobby for that?
But you're not the only engineer in the game here, so I get, why aren't more engineers coming up and going, I got a proposition, we don't need to do this. Why can't we get more people doing that?
I asked Jason Weck recently about the rebar thing, and he says, it's code. So, okay, it's code, but, and I think you touched on the OBC, we should be changing the code.
A lot faster. And
we should be improving the quality of the concrete.
Yeah.
Because if I'm putting 5 feet of concrete in the bottom of the hole, okay, why is the rebar even in there? If I can improve the concrete, if I don't put rebar in, it won't crack anyway. Mm-hmm. It's in dry ground. When you dig that whole thing, there's no water down there. So you see how that becomes obvious to someone who worked in the 80s.
So are we upsetting people because now you're taking profits from rebar company, you're taking profits from concrete company, you're taking profits from all the haulage?
Yeah.
Are we upsetting people here?
Well, I think that, there's no doubt that the rebar companies influence the OBC.
I would say so. There's got to be some sort of influence there.
But ultimately, the owner and the pace of construction, we're better off to have tower cranes in the city and give the owner more profit. I mean, it's reflected in our cost of condos.
Yeah. But I go back to that line. There's a line between the execs building the structure and the people building the structure.
Yeah, and those are bigger issues for your
story.
podcast to handle.
For sure. But
we touched on some of it today, but my patent's lower cost and schedule. So if somebody wants to do it in Mississauga, but even Mississauga gets influenced by Toronto. So in Mississauga, where we used to do condos, Matthews was a developer too, right?
I'm assuming Mississauga is probably the runner-up to the amount of construction that's going on to Toronto. Is that the next city that's big and?
Well, I mean, condos are big everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dealing with a huge population increase, and so somebody said to me this morning that it was. I think it was Dan and I were having coffee, and he mentioned there's 41 million people in Canada now.
Yeah, there is.
And so you end up, Trudeau's bringing them in. But I guess, there's a tolerance for immigrants, which is a good thing, but by the same token goes to the work ethic.
Yep.
Are they the same? And are their kids the same? It's really the second generation of Canadians. Maybe it's changed, right? The Italians, and are their kids? They're probably getting into computers and university education.
There's two schools of thought on that. Like, you get a lot of the people that did work in the industry when you guys started didn't want their kids to come into construction. They wanted a better life for them. But that's when construction was slightly different. Construction's better today, so it's still a viable option for these kids. But you're right. There's more options out there for the kids. So you're still competing. Tradespeople is not, or that skill, trades, is not at the top of the list, right?
Yeah, it's probably hard to feel sorry for the developers. I mean, probably the richest people are the people who do the developments, right?
I don't think. I mean, as much as you hear on social media, whatever, and certain structures are going into receivership or what have you, but that's not like no developer's just handling one tower. Like, there's lots going on. Everything's like there's a lot of money being made.
Who's going into receivership?
Well, Bloor one Bloor, whatever it was, right? The tallest structure that was being built at Yonge and Bloor there. Right, where as soon as Apple pulled out of there, being the flagship store that was going to be at the bottom there, it started having some problems. And then all of a sudden it went into receivership, and now another builder's taking it over, and now they're continuing it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, developers are making all kinds of money, and then you're hearing all kinds of stories about trades that are working, all the subcontracting. That's just how it is, because these developers are just project managers now. You got trades that are not being paid. If they're being paid, like they take months and months and months to get paid, if they get paid. But the majority of them are not being paid, and they're being paid minimum wages.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that going on. I've been sharing that on the show, and people have been reaching out, telling me, I'm a part of that. And it's just like you get onto a job and you're being asked to continue doing work, but you're not being compensated. You're not getting your draws. So why am I going to continue working? So all of a sudden you bail, and then they bring in somebody else, and then they bail, and then so on and so on. So there is a lot of there's a line drawn in the sand. Like,
so is one Bloor going to the same height again?
Sorry. Still everything's being the same. The only difference is they still don't know who's going to be at the bottom on the retail level, because Apple pulled out, right? So that was a big deal when Apple pulled out. Mm-hmm. So we don't know, right? I mean, there's been a lot of conversations, a lot of buildings that are not going forward now, a lot of subdivisions not going forward. Canada's economy is taking a huge hit. It's going to continue to take another hit. This show's going to drop the same week that the carbon tax is being increased, which is going to take another hit. I don't care how you want to slice it. If you've got a PM that is trying to tell the public that the increase of carbon tax is not directly related to the increase of inflation. Okay, well, he needs to go to an optometrist at that point, because it is directly affecting it. So there's a lot of factors going in, and then you got hardworking tradespeople working in these towers that are still making a lot of money, and they're not being compensated. So it's unfortunate, right?
Yeah, I mean, Toronto. A lot of people feel that Toronto's been picked on by Ottawa for years, right? So it just is almost
like you said earlier. We're the epicenter here. Like, we dictate what the rest of the country. We have the majority of the population's here, right here.
Well, you got to give kudos to Ford, right? Because Ford is at least calling out the carbon tax. You can't, it's crazy.
He is, but he's still. I go back to the word corruption. There's still some waft of corruption there with the Greenbelt, right?
Yeah.
Like I had Luca Bacci in here, He was on the show when he became the CEO of the OHBA, and he was very adamant about achieving that goal of 1.5 million homes in the next 10 years. And I was like, you're not going to make it. And then all of a sudden, it was like 7 or 8 months he was resigning, right? Because that whole greenbelt thing was happening. And so it's I guess it's just that's how our media is here in Canada. It's just like it happens, and then it starts to disappear, and something else happens, and then we keep on.
Well, the media is definitely
that's a whole other story.
And,
that's a whole other story. Yeah.
I'll show you another patent quick.
What else you want?
So
we gotta
FE
get close
patents,
to wrapping it up, but
sure.
Yeah, no, you just what else you want to show?
So go to FEHD plank. You see that there? This is a good one. So
what's this?
This one here, I was asked by Verdi, who was there's 2 patents here that combine.
What's the biggest diameter you can build here?
Oh, you could, okay, so the way that this happened, a lot of times what would happen is somebody would ask me. So the president of Verdi, Dennis Furlan, he and Lawrence Rigatti, they basically, he's a civil guy they asked me, can you solve this problem with the 407? So when they did the 407, and that's not Verdi, but when they did the 407, it's a pay road. You remember they sold it to for $1 billion.
Keep on feeding that corruption train. I get
that
it.
Was,
I understand.
You remember the guy who was premier? Anyway,
and now they're making loads of money.
So listen,
loads of money.
So what happened was Verdi was asked to try and come up with a price of they said their budget was $3,500 a lineal meter, and the way they were twice that. So they were so first of all, a culvert typically is designed with if you want to be low cost, it's designed with a 5 millimeter galvanized coating, right?
Okay.
So when you put that in the ground and you run water through it, the water will rust it from 4 to 7 o'clock. Gets a rust spot.
Of course.
So then they have to replace that, right? Because they're worried, well, you got a pay road on top. So they've been taking 1-inch HDPE and they weld it on the shoulder of the 407. And then they shut it and they bring the cranes in and they slide it through. Some of those culverts are 300 meters long. They pull it with a dozer from one end to the other. It's 1-inch HDPE. And it costs $7,000 a lineal meter, and they wanted to do for $3,500. So they said, well, can you figure that out? That's value engineering, So basically, rehab culvert in place. So I came up with an in situ, and I got 2 patents for it. So the CSP repair is I experimented with different plank, but this ended up being 0.07 HDPE plastic. And I figured I could do 100 meters or 100 feet a day with 6 men in place.
Okay.
So the culverts on the 407 are anywhere from 5 to 8 feet. And so you put the right crew in there, and they can do it. You can't put 6-footers in there, but you can put, 5'5" guys in there. And so it's like click flooring. And then I came up with, if you go back to the page there, you go to FE Spiral. So there's one called FE Spiral. So if I go to basaltic bar, okay, they wanted a 75-year life. So basically, you remember skipping rope?
Yeah.
So I took 4 millimeter basaltic, right? And after I built if I built 50 feet and I blocked it up, then I could basically take 4 millimeter basaltic, which is stiffer than 2.5 times stiffer than steel. So then I would could tighten that up. Then I could grout that at 2 inches. And I modeled it to 75 years with Plaxis with Matt Janes out of Issuit in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically I gave them what they wanted. So then at $3,500 a lineal meter, I said to Verdi, I said, okay, you should be able to make, it'll cost you $150 and a lineal meter, like $1,500 lineal meter. But I said you should be able to make, easy.
And it worked?
Well, I developed samples.
Okay.
And then they said, what happens? Okay, and I got to be careful, but the guy who runs Infrastructure Ontario, and he's Italian, and Verdi's Italian, right? So I mean, he said, well, we like the way we're doing it. So, the 407 is a private organization; they got the money, And I think Verdi makes more money on keeping it simple rather than figuring out what they gave me to do. But Verdi, you know, I respect Dennis Verlin and Lawrence, and, you know, they're doing their best, and they gave me a shot at it. I ended up with 2 patents. So that's how sometimes
But they still asked
happens.
you to do it. They still asked you to come up with it.
Yeah, but I end up doing it. And then, yeah, there's patent fees and stuff, but, you know, I can trigger this anytime. And so what happens if you're Highway 7 up north, what happens, you know what they do, is they take that road out. So when you're going to replace a culvert, they'll just shut that part down. They'll dig it up.
Yep.
Think of the civil cost. Then they put the culvert back in. It's probably maybe...
It's huge.
Yeah, it's
huge.
That's right. So they couldn't do that on the 407.
So it's just a waste of money. It's just like, okay.
Well, it'd be, you know, I would like to be, I'd like to be, the best job would be, you know, maybe Michael DeAndrea's job, but, you know, they're not going to, I haven't paid the price in the city for that, to get a promotion like that, right?
Why can't we build the infrastructure in a city that will last a century? It just doesn't make any, no. But we're not, though. We're not doing it because of politicians, because people are like, no, we only need it to last 25.
No, I don't think they really want to admit that it only lasts 25. Like,
because then you get the contract again. Things fail for a reason, so then you can do it again.
The city doesn't think that like that.
No,
right?
but that's
like,
the city's money.
The city's being given big engineers who designed 1.2 meter subway walls. They went to P3 thinking that would help. So you end up with sort of saying, well, is the delivery model right? Should we maybe do a design build and break it up again? In other words, get 5 prices.
No, that's just, well, that makes too much sense, right?
Yeah. Well, you got 5 prices now in Toronto with, you got maybe 8 prices with special foundation work. But then, you know, you're confined by the architect and the engineer. And everybody says, well, there's lots of work. Why do I need the trouble? Like if you look at Roni, you know, they're a great company. But to some extent, bid the dots. Like, why would we change anything? HCM changed it. And that was a tremendous lasting advantage. So there's designs we did at HCM that all day long. You know, I was buying, at one point in time, I was buying 4.5-inch, 375 wall, seconds pipe, making my own helicals and getting 75 tons on them with a 40,000 foot-ton motor. So, you know, a very low-cost pile in wet conditions. And then we innovated the self-drilling bar micropile. There's probably a picture on this website, but, you know, we don't have to necessarily find it because I think I'm probably getting over time, eh? Yeah. And so the idea would be that normally there's a helical bracket and goes on the footing.
Yeah.
And that came from the helical industry. So then, you know, they used to put a helical in, and they'd put a sleeve on it.
Yeah, and it works.
Yeah, but then what I did was I did an EBO, then I shortened the helical bracket, and I could jack up, I could get 3 times the load. And the pile was a third the cost because a helical is very expensive. And, you know, if you start doing design build and you're willing to stamp it, the structural guy says, well, I got to stamp, and I like this Jason Wett guy. And he's not going to do anything.
See, that makes sense to me, Martin. It just,
design build. You got to do design build.
Yeah, but
so I would be an advocate for design build.
I know, but the city won't do that.
Well, I think really you're right, but then it's the big engineer that says, well, you don't want any risk. Like, we don't want any risk, so it's 1.2 meter walls. But people should go to Young and Finch. The tile's still on the wall from the 1970s. Nobody having to rehab it, right?
I got to do the 12 questions, Martin.
Okay,
it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Martin Halliwell here, footprintengineering.ca to find him. You can reach him at Martin H at footprintengineering.ca. His phone number 519-240-6334. You ready for these questions?
Yeah, I'm going to wing it.
Well,
I didn't practice.
No, you don't have to practice. What is your favorite construction word?
Production.
What's your least favorite tool?
Luffer casing.
Okay. What construction sound do you love?
The sound of a diesel motor.
It is nice. Favorite beverage?
Sparkling water.
Any particular brand? San Pellegrino or something? Or Perrier?
Sure.
Perrier, I find
Pellegrino
too
is
fizzy.
good.
Perrier is the French make it too fuzzy. The Italians know how to do it right. That's my endorsement. What's the worst and best part of construction?
The worst part for me is over design, and the best part is design build.
I agree. Favorite curse word?
I would say, unfortunately, Jesus Christ. We tend to sometimes say that, even though I'm Christian. Maybe it's called for help. Right?
Favorite vehicle in the entire world? Any mode of transportation?
F-150 pickup.
What do you miss from your childhood?
My mom and dad.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt one day?
Mayor of Toronto.
Good luck on that one. I told you already. You're going to fight the change or you're going to become the villain. One or the other. What profession would you not like to do?
Architect.
Still like that T-shirt. Last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at those pearly gates?
He was an honest man.
Martin, thanks so much, man.
You bet.
Yeah, you had a spectator, but he was really quiet here, just checking out the show from the sidelines.
Well, no, it's important that he came because, he's my tech guy.
Awesome, man.
And we go way back. He's actually was a relative he was married to my sister's daughter.
Okay.
And he's a really good computer guy.
Okay.
So I would put a pitch in that, he'd like to stay with computers and not necessarily some of the stuff he's been doing lately. And I'm hoping that Feng Systems gives him an opportunity. So typically what I would do is I have 3 partners in Feng Systems, and I seed them with 10.1% each. So there's Dan, Andrea, who's a fluids engineer that's an expert at the FEB2 cell, and a fellow by the name of Justin Smith. And then I'm going to control it because I'm not going to get voted out again.
Yeah.
But the idea would be that, if you get a small team of people who want to change the world, anything's possible.
I agree. I totally agree. This show started with 1 listener.
Yeah, 1 listener.
It's as simple as it gets, right? It doesn't have 1 listener now. It has a few more than that. But
well, I'll be happy to help you any way I can.
Well, Martin, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been a really interesting conversation, man. I like having these conversations, man.
Yeah, no, you're good at it. So
Thanks, man.
God bless. We didn't get too much controversy.
We'll get into more. Obviously, you'll be back. We'll do more stuff. There's a lot more to talk. We just scratched the surface, man, on this.
No, I'm happy to come on every 3 or 6 months and
we'll figure it
do
out.
an update and say, how you doing with that?
Exactly.
When I sell my patents, I should come on again.
Sure. We can get into more of them, man. That's it. We're done.
Okay, God bless
Thanks,
you.
Angelina.